You know what's the thing nobody uses Apple devices for? Yes, building weapons of mass destruction, but also playing video games. Besides mobile gaming, but that's just a small minority of the market, accounting for billions of dollars in revenue. What was he talking about? There's usually a discussion about whether you should buy a Mac or a PC for any given task, but for games, there's no contest. You just have to buy a PC. Many people avoid Macs for this specific reason, but I actually think Apple could have a chance in this market, and that they probably should try. And yes, I know Apple Arcade exists, but the platform I'm envisioning is about AAA titles and rivaling the likes of PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, and Steam, not mobile gaming. So how should an Apple gaming platform be? Let's make something very clear. For this to work, Apple has to make deals with all the major publishers. They can build the best platform ever, but obviously it's all about games. If Apple is to be successful in a market like this, it has to have them all. By the way, while I was working on this video, a rumor came out about EA wanting to be bought by Apple. Why does this always happen? I don't really like this trend of everyone acquiring everyone, but I must admit that were they to buy one of the big players, like EA, it would definitely give them an advantage. Anyway, this is Apple. Every time they enter a new market, they have to reinvent the wheel. It's something that's just part of their DNA. Sometimes they overcomplicate things, sometimes this leads to great innovations. One of the obvious questions to ask in this case is, how would they redesign a controller? There's no way they would ever create a serious gaming service without also providing their own official controller, so here's what I came up with. One of the main changes has to do with the D-pad. In basically every other controller it looks something like this, but in my concept I essentially replaced it with the touchpad from the new Apple TV remote. It's a solution that doesn't require the loss of any functionality, as the new touchpad can be pressed to indicate directions, but it can also do a lot more. It's a touchpad, so it allows for swipes and gestures. One of the coolest functionalities, in my opinion, is that it can be used like an iPad's click wheel to navigate lists or progress bars. PlayStation with the DualShock 4 has tried to integrate a touchpad, but nobody really used it. Most of the times, it just ended up being the menu button. But by fusing the touchpad with the D-pad, so by placing it way more within the user's reach, I think it's possible both developers and players may want to use it more. The other obvious change has to do with the sticks. They can be pressed, like in most other controllers, but in my concept, each stick has a unique icon to make it more obvious which one you should press when the game demands it. And let's see if you can guess where the inspiration for the design of the front buttons came from. Now, as I said, the entire point of this strategy would be to get rid of one of the main reasons people prefer PCs over Macs. The service I'm envisioning is one that's complete, with at least all of the most played games you can find on Steam, and that works across the entire Apple ecosystem, so that every game runs on every device, with shared achievements and progress. But is this enough? People over the years have gotten accustomed to the status quo. They've built ridiculously expensive computers and incredibly vast Steam libraries. Even if Apple managed to create a service on par with Steam overnight, that doesn't mean they get the same results overnight. I'm pretty sure the only way for this to work would be to make the service cloud-based, which is not how Apple Arcade works. It's like how Google Stadia used to work. Because of this, the only logical way to price this service is with monthly payments, like any other streaming service. Having the whole library run natively on the various devices would be pretty cool, but it's probably too complex. If there's something Apple Arcade does right, is that it costs just $5 per month. Considering how I'd want this other separate service to be, and considering how much all of this would cost Apple, is there any chance they'd be able to also price it at just $5? No, but it doesn't matter. The most important thing to get right at the start is growth. They would have to convince as many people as possible to use the service, even at a loss. They only need to keep the price that low for the first few years, just enough to build a decently sized user base and to be universally recognized as a legit competitor. Google Stadia failed. Why shouldn't this service meet the same fate? Well, Stadia was a service you had to pay. On top of that, you also had to buy each game separately. The games also costed way more than what they would have costed elsewhere. Plus, no real exclusives or relevance, which is something Nintendo and Sony rely heavily on. This last point in particular is why I talked about the importance of making deals with other companies or straight up acquiring them. I think Stadia wasn't necessarily doomed to fail, and that Apple may be able to succeed where Google didn't. And speaking of succeeding where others didn't, you know how Apple is allegedly working on a couple of headsets for AR and or VR? Information about them of any kind is starting to surface at an increasingly higher rate, it seems. We may even just be days away from seeing the OS that will power those devices. If the pretty vague and general name of Reality OS that is an indicator of something is that maybe they will run the same OS. In that case, I made a concept of how I think the Apple Glass and the OS should be like. A transition as smooth as sandpaper. Anyway, check it out if you want. Ciao!